Chapter 13. The Ancient Order of Blessings, the Prophet's Father, the Patriarch's Mother, his father, Kirtland High School, apostasy and persecution, exodus of the Church. Concerning affairs at Kirtland subsequent to the dedication of the temple, and people and incidents of those times, Eliza R. Snow continues, with the restoration of the fullness of the gospel came also the ancient order of patriarchal blessings. Each father, holding the priesthood, stands as a patriarch at the head of his family, with invested right and power to bless his household and to predict concerning the future on the heads of his children, as did Jacob of old. Inasmuch as many fathers have died without having conferred those blessings, God, in the order of his kingdom, has made provisions to supply the deficiency by choosing men to officiate as patriarchs, whose province it is to bless the fatherless. Joseph Smith, Sr., was ordained to this office and held the position of first patriarch in the church. He was also, by appointment, president of the Kirtland Stake of Zion, consequently the first presiding officer in all general meetings for worship. A few words descriptive of this noble man may not be deemed amiss in this connection. Of a fine physique, he was more than ordinarily prepossessing in personal appearance. His kind, affable, dignified, and unassuming manner naturally inspired strangers with feelings of love and reverence. To me, he was the veritable personification of my idea of the ancient Father Abraham. In his decisions, he was strictly just. What can be said of very few may be truly said of him. In judging between man and man, his judgment could not be biased by either personal advantage, sympathy, or affection. Such a man was worthy of being the father of the first prophet of the last dispensation, while his amiable and affectionate consort, Mother Lucy Smith, was as worthy of being the mother of her faith, faithfulness, and untiring efforts in labors of love and duty, until she was broken down by the weight of years and sorrow. Too much cannot be said. I was present on the 17th of May, when a messenger arrived and informed the prophet Joseph that his grandmother, Mary Duty Smith, had arrived at Fairport on her way to Kirtland and wished him to come for her. The messenger stated that she said she had asked the Lord that she might live to see her children and grandchildren once more. The prophet responded with earnestness, "I wish she had set the time longer." I pondered in silence over this remark, thinking there might be more meaning in the expression than the words indicated, which was proven by the result, for she only lived a few days after her arrival. She was in the 94th year of her age, in appearance not over 75. She had not been baptized on account of the opposition of her oldest son, Jesse, who was a bitter enemy to the work. She said to Mother Lucy Smith, "I am going to have your Joseph baptize me, and my Joseph, the patriarch, bless me." Her husband, Israel Smith, died in St. Lawrence County, New York, after having received the Book of Mormon and read it nearly through. He had, long before, predicted that a prophet would be raised up in his family, and was satisfied that his grandson was that prophet. The venerable widow was also well assured of the fact. The next day after her arrival at the house of the prophet, where she was welcomed with every manifestation of kindness and affection, her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, all who were residents of Kirtland, and 2 of her sons, who arrived with her, came together to enjoy with her a social family meeting. And a happy one it was, a season of pure reciprocal conviviality, in which her buoyancy of spirit greatly augmented the general joy. Let the reader imagine for a moment this aged matron, surrounded by her 4 sons, Joseph, Asael, Silas, and John, all of them, as well as several of her grandsons, upwards of 6 feet in height, with a score of great-grandchildren of various sizes intermixed. Surely the sight was not an uninteresting one. To her it was very exciting, too much so for her years. Feverish symptoms, which were apparent on the following day, indicated that her nervous system had been overtaxed. She took her bed and survived but a few days. I was with her and saw her calmly fall asleep. About 10 minutes before she expired, she saw a group of angels in the room, and pointing towards them she exclaimed, "Oh, how beautiful! But they do not speak." It would seem that they were waiting to escort her spirit to its bright abode. But to return to the temple. After its dedication, the Kirtland High School was taught in the attic story by H.M. Hawes, professor of Greek and Latin. The school numbered from 130 to 140 students, divided into 3 departments: the classics, where only languages were taught; the English department, where mathematics, common arithmetic, geography, English grammar, reading and writing were taught; and the juvenile department. The 2 last were under assistant instructors. The school was commenced in November 1836, and the progress of the several classes, on examinations before trustees of the school, parents and guardians, was found to be of the highest order. Not only did the Almighty manifest His acceptance of that house at its dedication, but an abiding holy heavenly influence was realized, and many extraordinary manifestations of His power were experienced on subsequent occasions. Not only were angels often seen within, but a pillar of light was several times seen resting down upon the roof. Besides being devoted to general meetings for worship and the celebration of the Lord's Supper every first day of the week, the temple was occupied by crowded assemblies on the first Thursday in each month, that day being observed strictly by the Latter-day Saints as a day of fasting and prayer. These, called fast meetings, were hallowed and interesting beyond the power of language to describe. Many were the Pentecostal seasons of the outpouring of the Spirit of God on those days, manifesting the gifts of the gospel and the power of healing, prophesying, speaking in tongues, the interpretation of tongues, etc. I have there seen the lame man, on being administered to, throw aside his crutches and walk home perfectly healed, and not only were the lame made to walk, but the blind to see, the deaf to hear, the dumb to speak, and evil spirits to depart. On those fast days, the curtains, or veils, mentioned in a preceding chapter, which intersected at right angles, were dropped, dividing the house into 4 equal parts. Each of these sections had a presiding officer, and the meeting in each section was conducted as though no other were in the building, which afforded opportunity for 4 persons to occupy the same time. These meetings commenced early in the day and continued without intermission till 4 p.m. 1 hour previous to dismissal, the veils were drawn up and the 4 congregations brought together, and the people who, in the forepart of the day, were instructed to spend much of the time in prayer, and to speak, sing, and pray, mostly in our own language, lest a spirit of enthusiasm should creep in, were permitted, after the curtains were drawn, to speak or sing in tongues, prophesy, pray, interpret tongues, exhort, or preach, however they might feel moved upon to do. Then the united faith of the saints brought them into close fellowship with the spirits of the just, and earth and heaven seemed in close proximity. On fast days, Father Smith's constant practice was to repair to the temple very early, and offer up his prayers before sunrise, and there await the coming of the people, and so strictly disciplined himself in the observance of fasting, as not even to wet his lips with water until after the dismissal of the meeting at 4 p.m. One morning, when he opened meeting, he prayed fervently that the Spirit of the Most High might be poured out as it was at Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost, that it might come like a mighty rushing wind. It was not long before it did come, to the astonishment of all, and filled the house. It appeared as though the old gentleman had forgotten what he had prayed for. When it came, he was greatly surprised, and exclaimed, "What? Is the house on fire?" While the faithful saints were enjoying those supernal privileges, the accuser of the brethren did not sleep. Apostasy, with its poisonous fangs, crept into the hearts of some who but a few months before were in quorum meetings, when heavenly hosts appeared, and where, in all humility of soul, they united with their brethren in sublime shouts of Hosanna to God and the Lamb. And now, full of pride and self-conceit, they join hands with our enemies and take the lead in mobocracy against the work which they had advocated with all the energies of their souls. What a strange and fearful metamorphosis! How suddenly people become debased when, having grieved away the Spirit of God, the opposite takes possession of their hearts. We read that angels have fallen, and that one of our Savior's chosen 12 was Judas, the traitor. Inasmuch as the same causes produce the same effects in all ages, it is no wonder that Joseph Smith, in introducing the same principles, should have to suffer what was to the philosophic Paul the greatest of all trials, that among false brethren, illegal, vexatious lawsuits, one after another, were successively instituted, and the leading officers of the church dragged into court, creating great annoyance and expenditure. This not being sufficient to satisfy the greed of persecution, the lives of some of the brethren were sought, and they left Kirtland and sought safety in the west. At this time my father was residing 1 mile south of the temple. About 12 o'clock one bitter cold night, he was startled by a knock at the door, and who should enter but Father Smith, the patriarch. A state's warrant had been served on him for an alleged crime, and the officer in whose custody he was placed, although an enemy to the church, knowing the old gentleman to be innocent, had preconcerted a stratagem by which he had been let down from a window in the room to which he had taken him, ostensibly for private consultation, but purposely to set him at liberty, having previously prepared a way by which he could reach the ground uninjured. He also told him where to go for safety, directing him to my father's house. The officer returned to the courtroom as though Father Smith followed in the rear, when, on a sudden, he looked back, and not seeing his prisoner, he hurried back to the private room, examining every point, and returned in great apparent amazement and confusion, declaring that the prisoner had gone in an unaccountable manner, saying ludicrously, "This, gentleman, is another Mormon miracle." No vigorous search was made. All must have been convinced that the proceedings were as unjust as illegal. To return to my father's house, we were proud of our guest, and all of the family took pleasure in anticipating and supplying his wants. He remained with us 2 weeks, and in the meantime settled up all his business matters, and, having been joined by his youngest son, Don Carlos, and 5 other brethren whose lives had been threatened, he bade a final adieu to Kirtland at 1 hour past midnight, on the 21st of December, 1837. The night was intensely cold, but as they had no conveyance except one horse, they had sufficient walking exercise to prevent freezing. They found a few Latter-day Saints in a southern county of Ohio, where they stayed till spring, when they left for Missouri. The pressure of opposition increased, and before spring the prophet and his brother Hiram had to leave, and, in the spring and summer of 1838, the most of the church followed, leaving our homes and our sacred, beautiful temple, the sanctuary of the Lord God of hosts.